The first time the Viking Alpha King saw the woman holding his children, he ordered his warriors to aim their arrows at her. No one questioned the command, because the stranger wrapped around the two royal pups wasn't a queen, or a warrior, or even a trusted wolf. She was the scentless Omega the Northern Kingdom had cast into the frozen wilderness to die. Yet something impossible happened the moment his soldiers stepped forward. The Alpha heirs, two pups too young to speak, too young to understand power, lunged at the warriors, snarling with enough fury to make battle-hardened alphas hesitate. They weren't afraid of the stranger. They were protecting her. The king had crossed half the north believing an enemy had stolen his heirs. Instead, he found them asleep against the heartbeat of the one woman every wolf had rejected. No chains, no magic, no force, just absolute trust. And the more he looked at the mysterious Omega, the less the impossible made sense. She carried no alpha scent, no royal mark, no family name. So, why did the future rulers of his kingdom refuse to let anyone touch her? His generals demanded the exile be executed before sunrise. The elders called her a curse. The kingdom would rather see her buried beneath the snow than standing beside their king. But before that night was over, the most feared alpha in the Viking North would make a decision that would shatter centuries of wolf law. Because the greatest secret hidden beneath the blizzard was never why the Omega saved the king's pups. It was why the pups had recognized their true mate before the king ever did. Too quiet. Far too quiet. Then, an arrow exploded through his throat. Blood sprayed across untouched snow. Ambush. The mountains erupted. Dark figures appeared from impossible heights, leaping onto the convoy with axes and hooked blades. The first sled overturned instantly. Horses screamed. Iron shattered. Another volley of arrows darkened the sky. Royal guards fell before they even reached their weapons. The attackers fought without words, without hesitation. Professional killers. One warrior reached the royal carriage. Another intercepted him. Axes collided. The impact echoed through the mountains. Inside, the twins awakened. Their cries pierced the storm. A surviving guard ripped open the carriage door. "You must run." There was no one to run. No nurse. No escort. Only chaos. Another explosion shattered the axle. The carriage rolled down an icy slope, smashing against ancient pine trees before disappearing into drifting snow. Silence followed. Only the blizzard remained. The assassins searched the battlefield. Bodies. Broken wagons. Dead horses. But no royal heirs. One masked commander looked toward the endless wilderness. Find them. By nightfall, victory banners returned to Ironfang Fortress. Massive wooden gates groaned open as King Ragnar rode through them atop his enormous black wolf, Fenrir. Every warrior lowered their head. Every servant stepped aside. The king had returned undefeated once again. His armor was stained with enemy blood. His broad shoulders carried the weight of countless battles. Long dark hair whipped across a face carved by grief more than time. He did not celebrate victories anymore. Victories reminded him who was absent. The great hall doors burst open before he reached the throne. A messenger stumbled inside, bleeding, terrified. He collapsed onto one knee. "My king." Ragnar's expression hardened. The royal convoy, silence spread through the hall, was attacked. Every heartbeat seemed to vanish. The twins are missing. The hall froze. Then the air itself changed. An alpha aura exploded outward like invisible lightning. Candles shattered. Wooden tables cracked. Even seasoned Viking warriors instinctively stepped backward. Ragnar did not shout. His voice became far more terrifying. Who survives? No one. Except perhaps the children. Perhaps. The messenger lowered his head. "We found blood. Not theirs. Not confirmed. Only blood." Ragnar slowly closed his eyes. For one impossible heartbeat, he saw his dead queen smiling as she placed the newborn twins into his arms. Then, he opened them again. The grieving husband disappeared. Only the Alpha King remained. "Seal every harbor." His voice echoed across the great hall. "Close every mountain pass." Every commander knelt. Search every forest. His wolf growled beside him. Bring me my children. Silence swallowed the room. Or pray the gods bury you before I find whoever failed them. The entire kingdom moved before dawn. Thousands of warriors vanished into the storm. Meanwhile, Lyra struggled through waist-deep snow toward the faint outline of a collapsed carriage buried beneath ice. Something glittered beneath the moonlight. Silver. Royal silver. She brushed frozen snow aside. Her breath caught. The carriage doors hung open. Blood covered the wooden floor. No adults remained alive. Only two tiny cries echoed from beneath overturned blankets. Twins. Infants no older than a few weeks. Wrapped in royal blue furs embroidered with the iron fawn crest. Her heart stopped. Royal children. If anyone found her here, she would never survive the accusation. Every instinct screamed at her to leave. Walk away. Forget she had ever seen them. No one would blame a rejected Omega for saving herself. The babies cried again. Smaller now. Weaker. One tiny hand escaped the blankets, reaching blindly toward the frozen air. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, then whispered the words she had spoken to herself every winter. I can't leave someone who still needs hope. She wrapped both infants inside her own cloak, pressing them against her chest. Their tiny bodies were frighteningly cold. Without another thought, she turned toward the forest. Behind her, fresh footprints appeared in the snow. Not hers. Hunters. The assassins had found the trail. Lyra ran. Branches whipped across her face. The wind stole her breath. The babies remained silent against her heartbeat, as if somehow recognizing the rhythm beneath her ribs. Hours later, she reached the mouth of an abandoned cave hidden beneath towering cliffs. Too exhausted to continue, she stepped inside. Darkness embraced her. She gathered dry moss, lit a trembling fire, and held the twins close enough for warmth without burning them. Outside, a howl shattered the night. Then another. And another. Dozens. No, hundreds. Wolves. The sound circled the cave from every direction. Lyra slowly stood. She had no weapon. No strength. Only two sleeping children resting against her heart. If this is where my story ends... Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Then no one touches them until after I'm gone. The howling stopped. Complete silence settled across the mountain. Heavy footsteps echoed outside the cave entrance. One enormous shadow emerged through the falling snow. A black wolf. Larger than any beast she had ever imagined. Golden eyes burned through the darkness. The legendary royal wolf. Fenrir. Lyra tightened her hold on the twins and prepared for death. But the impossible happened. The giant wolf lowered his massive head. Then, one after another, every wolf surrounding the cave followed. Not in attack. In reverence. As though they had recognized something inside the rejected Omega long before she ever could. And somewhere beyond the storm, a king unknowingly rode toward the woman destiny had already chosen. The northern kingdom disappeared beneath winter. Not the gentle snowfall sung about by wandering bards. This was an ancient storm. A living thing. The wind screamed between black mountain peaks like forgotten wolves mourning beneath the moon. Snow whipped across frozen valleys with such violence that entire pine forests bent beneath its fury, their branches snapping one after another like old bones. Nothing moved willingly through the wilderness. Not deer. Not ravens. Not even the great wolves whose blood had once built kingdoms. Only one lonely figure continued walking. Lyra. Her wool cloak had long surrendered to the storm. Ice clung to every loose strand of silver-brown hair escaping beneath her hood. Her boots were split along the seams, allowing freezing water to numb her feet with every step. She could barely feel her fingers anymore. Or perhaps she simply no longer remembered what warmth felt like. Behind her stretched only endless snow. Ahead, more snow. That had been her life for years. Never arriving. Never belonging. Only surviving. A weathered leather satchel rested against her side, filled with dried herbs, crude bandages, and the few possessions exile had not stolen from her. The storm carried voices. Not real voices. Memories. Cursed child. She has no scent. The moon rejected her. Don't let her near the Alpha children. The words echoed louder than the wind. She lowered her head and continued walking. Every village had spoken them. Every pack. Every home she had begged shelter from. At first she had cried. Later she had pleaded.
Now.
She simply walked away before they finished speaking. Because rejection hurt less when expected. Hours passed beneath an endless white sky until a faint sound reached her ears. A whimper, almost lost beneath the storm. Lyra stopped. The wind howled again.
There.
Another cry.
Soft. Weak.
She followed it through drifting snow until she discovered a young gray wolf trapped inside an iron hunting snare hidden beneath fresh powder. The animal snarled the moment it saw her.
Fear. Pain.
Desperation. Its leg twisted unnaturally as blood froze against silver fur. Lyra slowly knelt despite exhaustion, pulling at every muscle. I know, she whispered. The wolf snapped toward her trembling hand. I know exactly how frightened you are. She did not move closer. She waited. The storm continued screaming around them. After a long moment, the wolf's growls weakened. Its golden eyes never left hers. Neither held dominance, only understanding. Lyra carefully reached toward the rusted trap. Cold iron burned against frozen fingers. She pulled. Nothing. Again. The metal refused to move. She braced both hands against the mechanism and pushed with every remaining ounce of strength inside her starving body. The trap sprang open. The wolf stumbled backward, collapsing into the snow. Lyra immediately tore a strip from the edge of her own cloak, the only warm clothing she possessed. She wrapped the injured leg with practiced care before stepping away. You'll survive. The wolf stared, not fleeing, simply watching, as though trying to understand why someone who had nothing had still chosen to give. Then it disappeared into the blizzard. Lyra smiled faintly. Helping others never filled an empty stomach. But it reminded her she was still human, even if no one else believed it. Miles away, the storm carried a different sound. Steel. The royal convoy carved through the mountain pass with disciplined precision. Massive sleds reinforced by oak and iron cut across deep snow while armored Viking warriors rode alongside mounted wolves larger than horses. Blue banners bearing Ragnar Ironfang's Black Wolf crest whipped violently through the wind. Inside the central carriage, 2 newborn Alpha heirs slept beneath layers of white fur. The future of the kingdom. The bloodline every enemy wished to erase. Captain Eirik scanned the cliffs above. His instincts tightened. The wolves did not move. Snow drifted through the mouth of the cave in soft white ribbons, disappearing into the dancing orange glow of Lyra's tiny fire. The bitter scent of pine, smoke, and frozen earth lingered in the cold air while silence settled over the mountain like a living spirit. Lyra stood motionless. One arm cradled the sleeping infants against her chest. The other instinctively reached for the crude hunting knife hanging from her belt. It would never stop a beast like the one standing before her. Fenrir. Even in exile, every child had heard stories about him. The Black Wolf of Ironfang. The companion of the Alpha King. A creature said to recognize only strength and kill anything foolish enough to threaten its master. Yet he wasn't growling. He wasn't baring his teeth. His enormous golden eyes remained fixed on the tiny royal heirs sleeping peacefully beneath Lyra's cloak. Slowly, the ancient wolf lowered himself onto the frozen stone outside the cave. Watching, guarding, waiting. Lyra's heartbeat refused to slow. This doesn't make sense. Her voice barely escaped her lips. She had spent years running from wolves. Years hiding from alphas who believed omegas like her were little more than burdens. Nothing about tonight made sense. Not the infants. Not the assassins. Not the wolves kneeling before a scentless exile. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but none of the wolves crossed the invisible lines surrounding the cave. As though an unspoken command held them back. Hours slipped by. The twins stirred. One of them whimpered softly before opening bright silver-gray eyes. Lyra immediately wrapped him closer. It's all right. Her whisper was warm despite the freezing air. You don't have to be afraid. The infant reached upward with tiny fingers, grabbing the edge of her cloak. Almost instantly, his crying stopped. His brother followed moments later, pressing his face against her heartbeat. The cave became impossibly still. Even Fenrir's ears twitched. The enormous wolf slowly closed his eyes, satisfied. Far below the mountain, torches burned like rivers of fire across the snow-covered valley. Hundreds of Viking warriors spread through the wilderness in disciplined formations. They searched abandoned cabins, frozen lakes, hidden caves, every place desperate parents would choose to shelter children, every place assassins would choose to hide them. No one dared return empty-handed, because everyone knew their king. King Ragnar Stormfang forgave failure in battle. He never forgave failure toward family. Ragnar himself rode ahead of every search party. Snow gathered across his dark cloak but never remained long. His immense black wolf cut through the blizzard with terrifying confidence, its paws leaving deep marks in the untouched wilderness. The king's face remained unreadable. Only those closest to him recognized the truth. He had not slept, not since hearing the news. His commanders exchanged uneasy glances behind him. No one spoke. Every warrior remembered another winter years ago. Another desperate ride through endless snow. That night they had searched for a queen dying during childbirth. They had arrived too late. None wished to witness history repeat itself. Fenrir suddenly stopped. The wolf lifted his massive head. One deep growl rolled through the mountains. Ragnar immediately pulled the reins. "What is it?" Fenrir ignored him. Golden eyes remained fixed toward the northern cliffs. Then, without warning, the great wolf bolted into the storm. "Fenrir." Ragnar urged his horse forward. The elite warriors followed. No one questioned the wolf's instincts. Not after years of war. Not after countless battles won, because Fenrir had sensed danger before any scout. If the wolf had found something, the king intended to reach it first. Inside the cave, Lyra's fire had nearly died. She carefully fed another handful of dry moss into the fading flames while the twins slept beneath layers of fur. One of them suddenly smiled. Not awake, dreaming. The tiny expression pierced something deep inside her heart. She couldn't remember ever smiling like that as a child. Her own memories began with cold, with whispered accusations, with doors closing before she reached them. No mother singing, no father lifting her into his arms, only frightened faces turning away. She gently brushed a finger across the baby's tiny cheek. "You'll never remember tonight." A sad smile touched her lips. Maybe that's a blessing. The child instinctively wrapped tiny fingers around hers.
Warm. Trusting.
Unafraid. Something inside Lyra trembled. For years she had convinced herself she no longer needed anyone. Yet two helpless infants had undone years of carefully built loneliness within a single night. The sound of footsteps shattered the silence. Not wolves.
Human. Heavy.
Armored. Many of them. Lyra's body stiffened. The assassins. They had found her. She immediately extinguished the fire. Darkness swallowed the cave. She pressed the twins close and backed against the stone wall. Steel scraped against rock outside. A deep masculine voice echoed through the entrance. "Someone is inside." Another replied, "I smell smoke." Lyra's breathing slowed. Think. Run? Impossible. Fight? Hopeless. Hide? There was nowhere left. The infant stirred. One tiny cry escaped into the darkness. Silence followed. Then footsteps entered the cave. A broad silhouette appeared against the white light outside. Massive. Armored. Towering. The figure slowly drew an enormous sword. Its polished steel reflected the pale moonlight. Lyra's pulse thundered. She had seen men like this before. Alphas. Powerful.
Certain.
Dangerous. The stranger took another step, then another, until moonlight finally revealed his face.
Sharp jaw.
Long dark hair braided behind his shoulders. Cold blue-gray eyes hardened by endless war. A scar crossed one cheek. Another disappeared beneath his collar. Power radiated from him without effort. Not arrogance.
Authority.
the kind born from surviving things that broke everyone else. King Ragnar, the Alpha King himself. For one endless heartbeat, neither moved. His eyes immediately fell upon the infants in her arms.
Alive.
Breathing. Safe. Something almost invisible flickered across his face. Relief. Gone before anyone else might have noticed. Then his gaze lifted toward Lyra. Everything softened, vanished. His expression returned to stone. Give me my children.
His voice was calm. Too calm.
Lyra instinctively stepped backward.
No.
Every warrior behind Ragnar froze. No one
spoke to their king that way.
Ragnar's eyes narrowed. You misunderstand.
No.
Her voice trembled, but did not break. I understand perfectly. The twins shifted uneasily. She tightened her hold. I found them alone. They were freezing. There was blood everywhere. You could be anyone. Several warriors immediately reached for their weapons. Ragnar raised one hand. They stopped. The king slowly studied her.
Thin.
Exhausted. Clothes torn by the storm. Hands raw from cold. Not the appearance of a kidnapper. Yet appearances had deceived him before. I am Ragnar Ironfang. I know who you are. Then you know they belong with me. She looked down at the sleeping infants. They belong with someone who will protect them. The words struck harder than any blade. Ragnar stood absolutely still. No one had questioned him in years. Certainly not an Omega. Certainly not while holding his heirs. His alpha instincts urged him to take the children immediately. To dominate. To command. Instead, something stopped him. Perhaps because she was shaking. Not from fear of him. From exhaustion. Yet, even now, she placed herself between him and the twins.
Protecting them.
The babies suddenly awakened. For one terrible second, Ragnar expected them to cry. Instead, both infants stretched tiny arms toward Lyra again. Not him. Her. One buried his face against her shoulder. The other clung desperately to her cloak. The cave fell silent. Even the warriors looked away in discomfort. Ragnar felt something unfamiliar. Jealousy. Not toward another alpha. Toward a woman his children had known for only a few hours. Fenrir quietly walked into the cave. Without hesitation, the enormous wolf crossed directly to Lyra. He lowered himself beside her feet, guarding her. The king stared. Impossible. Fenrir trusted no one except him. Yet, tonight, his oldest companion had chosen. The silence stretched until Ragnar finally sheathed his sword. They're cold. Lyra nodded cautiously. They need proper shelter. They also need food. Her expression never softened. So do you. For the first time in years, the Alpha King noticed the hollowness beneath someone's eyes before noticing their weakness. She looked ready to collapse. Yet she had carried his heirs through a blizzard. Alone, Ragnar slowly removed the heavy fur cloak resting across his shoulders. Without speaking, he stepped closer. Every instinct warned Lyra to retreat. Instead, he carefully wrapped the thick royal fur around all three of them. His fingers briefly brushed hers. The moment lasted less than a heartbeat. Yet something invisible pulsed between them.
Warm.
Ancient. Almost alive. Both immediately stepped back. Neither understood what had just happened. Neither wanted to. Ragnar turned toward the cave entrance. We returned to Ironfang. His commanders looked confused. My king. The Omega? Ragnar glanced back only once. She comes with us. Lyra's heart sank. A royal fortress. A palace filled with alphas. A place where she would never belong. She looked toward the endless storm outside. For the first time, the frozen wilderness no longer seemed like the most dangerous place in the kingdom, because somewhere inside Ironfang Fortress, someone had already begun watching the gates. Someone who smiled when kingdoms bled. And as the royal procession disappeared into the snow, Astrid Blackthorn quietly unfolded an ancient parchment inside her private chamber. A silver moon-shaped birthmark stared back at her from the faded drawing, the same mark she had glimpsed beneath the Omega's torn sleeve. Astrid's smile slowly widened. So, she whispered into the candlelit darkness, The moon-blessed child survived. She folded the parchment shut. No one must discover who she truly is. Morning arrived, without warmth. The first light of dawn struggled through the towering windows of Ironfang Fortress, casting pale silver beams across ancient stone floors polished by generations of Viking kings. Outside, snow continued falling over the cliffs, burying the kingdom beneath another layer of white silence. Inside the fortress, the cold came from its people. Lyra walked quietly through the endless corridors, her borrowed wool dress brushing softly against the stone floor. Every step echoed beneath the vaulted ceilings, but none echoed louder than the whispers following behind her. There she is, the scentless Omega. The king brought her into the fortress. I heard the royal pups refuse everyone except her. That isn't natural. No, it's dangerous. Servants lowered their voices as she passed, yet none lowered them enough. Every word found her. Every stare settled heavily upon her shoulders. She kept her eyes forward. She had lived with judgment her entire life. But somehow, being judged inside the Alpha King's home hurt more than all the villages that had rejected her before. Perhaps because, for the first time in years, a tiny part of her had begun believing she might finally belong somewhere. That hope frightened her more than the whispers ever could. At the far end of the corridor, laughter suddenly broke the silence.
Soft. Pure.
The twins. Lyra's expression softened before she even reached the nursery. The moment she stepped through the carved oak doors, both infants immediately turned toward her. Their tiny faces brightened. Little hands reached into the air. The royal nurse sighed in relief. They've refused to eat since sunrise. Lyra frowned. They're ill. The elderly nurse shook her head.
No.
She smiled gently. They've simply been waiting for you. Lyra's heart tightened. She carefully lifted the first child into her arms. The little Alpha immediately rested his head against her shoulder, releasing a peaceful sigh that filled the room with unexpected warmth. His brother reached for her sleeve only moments later. Within seconds, both babies had stopped crying. The nursery became perfectly quiet. Even the fireplace seemed to burn softer. The old nurse stared in amazement. I've served this family for 33 winters. She slowly shook her head. I've never seen royal Alpha heirs trust anyone this quickly. Lyra looked down at the sleeping infants. They're only frightened. So are you. The voice came from the doorway. King Ragnar. Every servant immediately bowed. Lyra remained standing, still holding the twins. Ragnar dismissed the servants with a silent gesture. One by one, they disappeared from the room until only the three of them remained. For several quiet moments, neither adult spoke. The only sound came from the gentle crackling fire and the peaceful breathing of the children. Ragnar watched the impossible scene before him. His sons, the heirs of Ironfang, sleeping peacefully against the chest of a woman they had known for less than 2 days. Even after losing their mother, they had never slept this peacefully. Something inside him twisted painfully.
Guilt. Hope. Fear.
He no longer knew the difference. They trust you. His deep voice finally broke the silence. Lyra looked toward the fire instead of him. They're children. They don't know how to hate yet. The words lingered between them. Ragnar understood what she truly meant. Adults did. Children learned. He slowly stepped closer. The scent of cedarwood, snow, and steel surrounded him. Power followed every movement he made, yet today it carried exhaustion instead of intimidation. You saved their lives. I only did what anyone should.
No.
His eyes met hers. Not everyone would have. Lyra lowered her gaze. I wasn't thinking. I know. A faint smile almost reached Ragnar's lips. That's why you did. For the first time, silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Dangerously peaceful. Outside the nursery windows, snow continued falling across the kingdom.
Inside.
Something invisible had begun changing. Not love. Not yet. Trust. The first fragile thread connecting two broken souls. Neither noticed the shadow standing beyond the half-open door. Astrid Blackthorn. Hidden within the corridor. Watching everything. Every glance, every quiet word, every heartbeat of growing closeness. Her perfectly painted smile slowly disappeared. This should have been me, she whispered beneath her breath. For years she had waited beside Ragnar, advised him, protected his throne, comforted his grief after the queen's death. Yet the walls around his frozen heart had never cracked.
Now,
A nameless Omega entered his life, and within 2 days, his eyes had begun softening. Astrid's fingers tightened around the silver goblet she carried. The metal bent beneath the pressure. Jealousy was no longer enough. The Omega had become a threat, and threats were eliminated. The throne room held its breath. The blade in Ragnar's hand gleamed beneath the firelight, reflecting the frightened faces of nobles gathered along the stone walls. Outside, winter winds battered the fortress windows, their mournful howl echoing through Ironfang Hall like wolves mourning beneath a blood moon. Lyra stood alone in the center of the chamber. She neither pleaded nor protested. Her tired eyes remained fixed on Ragnar, the man whose children she had carried through death itself. Around her, the council whispered with growing confidence. The evidence is undeniable. She led the assassins to the heirs. Execute her before the curse spreads. Astrid remained silent. That silence was deliberate. She understood that the most convincing lies were the ones spoken by others. Ragnar slowly descended the steps leading from the Ironfang throne. Each heavy footstep echoed across the hall. His warriors watched anxiously. His advisors expected justice. His heart demanded something entirely different. He stopped only a few feet from Lyra. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but there was no fear in her eyes. Only disappointment. That hurt him more than any accusation. "You saved my sons," Ragnar said quietly. A murmur spread through the council. Several nobles exchanged uneasy looks. "If you believe that," Lyra answered, "then why am I standing here as your prisoner?" Ragnar had no answer, not one he could say aloud. Because kings were not permitted the luxury of uncertainty. A ruler who ignored evidence, however painful, invited rebellion. Yet every instinct inside him screamed that something was wrong. Fenrir padded into the chamber without warning. The great black wolf walked directly to Lyra's side and sat beside her, his massive body forming a silent shield. Gasps rippled through the hall. The royal wolf. He's protecting her. Impossible. Astrid's eyes narrowed. Even Fenrir had become an obstacle. She stepped forward gracefully, lowering her head in practiced respect. "My king," she said, her voice calm and measured. "No one questions Lady Lyra's kindness." She paused deliberately. But kindness has often been the mask worn by spies. Several council members nodded. The Eastern clans have used Omegas before to gain access to royal households. Another lord added, "If we spare her and she truly serves our enemies, your sons will never be safe." Every sentence tightened the invisible chains around Ragnar's heart. He looked toward the twins sleeping peacefully in their nurse's arms. Then back to Lyra.
duty,
Or trust.
king, or man.
The choice felt impossible. Finally, Ragnar sheathed his sword. The metallic sound echoed like a verdict. "I will not order her execution." Relief flickered through Lyra's eyes, but lasted only a heartbeat. Ragnar's expression hardened again. Instead, his voice grew heavy. "Lyra of the Western Pack, I banish you beyond the frozen Spine Mountains." The words struck the hall with crushing force. Some nobles looked disappointed, others satisfied. Astrid lowered her gaze to hide the smile threatening to appear. Lyra simply stood still. The silence between her and Ragnar became unbearable. "So," she whispered, "this is how gratitude ends." Ragnar forced himself not to react. "It is the only sentence that protects both your life and my kingdom." She laughed once, softly, not with amusement, with heartbreak. "You still believe I'm guilty?" "I believe my kingdom cannot survive another civil war." "That wasn't my question." Ragnar couldn't answer, because the truth terrified him. He wasn't sure what he believed anymore. And uncertainty was something an Alpha King could never show. Lyra slowly removed the heavy royal cloak he had given her after the blizzard. She folded it carefully, then placed it in his hands. I don't want anything that belongs to this fortress. For the first time since becoming king, Ragnar wished someone would order him what to do. Instead, he watched the woman who had saved everything precious to him walk away. Without tears, without begging, without looking back. Fenrir rose immediately. The great wolf took one step after Lyra. Ragnar's voice thundered across the hall. Stay. Fenrir froze. His golden eyes remained fixed on Lyra as she disappeared through the great doors. A low, sorrowful whine escaped the legendary beast. It was the first time anyone inside Ironfang Fortress had ever heard the royal wolf cry. The storm had returned. Snow swirled violently across the mountain road as Lyra crossed the fortress bridge alone. No guards escorted her. No servants offered farewell. Only the icy wind accompanied her into exile. She stopped once, not to look back at the fortress, but because she heard tiny cries carried by the wind. The twin heirs. They had awakened. From the highest nursery window, their cries echoed into the frozen night. They were calling for the only warmth they knew. Lyra closed her eyes. I'm sorry. The words vanished into the blizzard. Then she kept walking. Behind her, Ragnar stood alone on the highest battlement, invisible in the snow, watching until her small figure disappeared into endless white. Only when she was gone did he whisper the words no one else would ever hear. Forgive me. He did not know that beneath layers of snow, hidden among ancient pines, shadowed riders had already begun following Lyra's trail. Astrid's mercenaries had no intention of allowing the exiled Omega to reach the mountains alive. Winter refused to loosen its grip. Beyond the frozen Spine Mountains, where no banners flew and no king dared claim dominion, the world became older, quieter, almost sacred. The wind no longer sounded like a storm. It sounded like whispers. Whispers carried through ancient glaciers and forgotten forests where towering pines had stood since before the first Viking kingdom was forged. Lyra walked alone. Her boots left a single trail across untouched snow. 3 days had passed since Ragnar exiled her. 3 days without warmth. 3 days without sleep. 3 days of surviving on melted snow and bitter mountain berries. The wound inside her heart hurt far more than the cold ever could. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ragnar standing before the throne. Not as the warrior who had wrapped his royal cloak around her. Not as the father whose expression softened while watching his son sleep. Only as the king who had chosen duty over trust. She should have hated him.
She tried.
But every memory betrayed her. She remembered the exhaustion hidden behind his steel blue eyes. She remembered how gently he had carried his sleeping children. She remembered the hesitation in his voice before pronouncing exile. He had wanted to believe her. He simply hadn't been strong enough. Tears froze against her cheeks before they could fall. I won't cry anymore, she whispered into the empty wilderness. No one is coming for me. The mountains answered with silence. Far behind her, they came. 5 riders dressed in black wolf pelts crossed the frozen valley without torches. Astrid's mercenaries. Professional hunters. One of them knelt beside Lyra's footprints. She's alone. The oldest among them smiled coldly. The advisor wants proof. No witnesses. No body left to find. The hunt began. As dusk swallowed the mountains, Lyra's strength finally failed. Her vision blurred. The world tilted. She stumbled against an ancient stone covered in silver frost. It wasn't a boulder. It was a pillar. Another stood nearby. Then another. Each carved, with wolves lifting their heads toward a crescent moon. She had wandered into ruins. The remains of a civilization forgotten by every kingdom. A strange warmth pulsed beneath the snow. Soft, steady, almost like a heartbeat. Lyra reached out instinctively. The moment her fingertips touched the frozen stone, the mountain awakened. Silver light burst through thousands of ancient runes. The ground trembled. Ice cracked apart with deafening echoes that rolled across the valley. Hidden doors slowly emerged from beneath centuries of snow. A temple, not built by men, built by wolves. The great stone entrance opened by itself. Warm air drifted outward, carrying the scent of moonflowers, cedar, and spring rain. Impossible scents, in the middle of endless winter. Lyra stared in disbelief. What is this place? A gentle feminine voice answered from within the glowing darkness. It is your home. Inside Ironfang Fortress, nothing felt alive anymore. The nursery remained silent. Not because the twins slept, because they cried without stopping. Royal healers failed. Wet nurses failed. Even Fenrir lay outside their chamber, refusing food for the first time in years. The servants whispered that the fortress itself mourned. Ragnar stood alone beside the nursery window. Snow drifted across the courtyard below. Everywhere he looked, he saw Lyra. The chair where she had rocked the twins. The fireplace where she had laughed softly at Fenrir's stubbornness. The corridor where she had thanked frightened servants by name. The castle had grown colder after she left. Not physically, spiritually. A knock echoed at the door. One of his captains entered. My king. Ragnar never looked away from the window. What is it? We found something. Hope flashed through him. Lyra? The captain hesitated. No. He lowered his head. We found the bodies of 5 mercenaries. Ragnar finally turned. They carried Astrid Blackthorn's private seal. Silence filled the room. The captain continued carefully. They died north of the frozen spine. Ragnar's heartbeat slowed. Astrid. Mercenaries. North. Exactly where Lyra had been exiled. His blood ran cold. For days he had searched for reasons to silence the doubt inside him. Now doubt had become certainty. Someone had wanted Lyra dead. Not imprisoned. Not questioned.
Dead.
His voice became dangerously quiet. Bring me Astrid, my king.
Now.
Far beneath the mountains. Lyra followed the mysterious voice deeper into the temple. Crystal rivers flowed beneath transparent floors. Silver flames burned without heat. Ancient statues of enormous wolves stood guard along endless halls. At the center of the sanctuary waited women dressed in white robes embroidered with threads of moonlight. Their hair shimmered silver. Their eyes glowed softly, like stars reflected upon water. Moon priestesses. The eldest stepped forward. She smiled as though she had been waiting for centuries. You finally came. Lyra shook her head. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. The old woman gently touched the silver mark hidden beneath Lyra's shoulder. Immediately, the mark began glowing. Not faintly, brilliantly. The entire temple answered. Every crystal lit at once. The great wolves carved into the walls seemed almost alive. You were never rejected because you were weak, the priestess said. You were hidden because the world feared what you would become. Lyra's breathing became uneven. I don't understand. You have no scent because your soul belongs to something older than Alpha or Omega. The priestess pointed toward a circular pool of perfectly still water. Look. Lyra stepped closer. Her reflection stared back. Then, it changed. Silver light spread beneath her skin. Her eyes glowed like the full moon. Behind her appeared the spirit of an enormous, white she-wolf crowned in moonlight. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Lyra stumbled backward. What was that? The priestess lowered herself onto one knee. Then every other priestess followed, one by one, until the entire sanctuary knelt before the woman who had entered believing she was nothing. The Moon Queen, they whispered together. Our rightful guardian has returned. Far above the temple, the sky erupted. A column of silver light pierced the heavens. Across the north, every wolf lifted its head. Fenrir sprang to his feet outside Ironfang Fortress. His howl echoed through the night. Ragnar stepped onto the battlements just in time to see the radiant light rising beyond the frozen Spine Mountains. His heart whispered a single name, Lyra. And for the first time since her exile, hope returned. The silver light rising from the frozen Spine Mountains did not fade with dawn. It grew brighter, like a second moon had descended upon the earth. Across the northern kingdom, wolves abandoned their hunts and lifted their heads toward the glowing horizon. Ravens flooded the skies. Even the restless sea became strangely calm, as though the world itself had paused to witness the awakening of an ancient destiny. Inside Ironfang Fortress, every warrior stood upon the battlements, staring toward the impossible light. Only one man did not hesitate. King Ragnar Ironfang. His steel-blue eyes remained fixed on the mountains where Lyra had vanished. For days he had carried the crushing weight of regret. Now, that regret had become certainty. Astrid had never wanted justice. She had wanted Lyra dead. The realization struck him harder than any blade ever had. Without another word, Ragnar turned sharply. "Prepare my horse." His commanders hurried into motion. "My king, the council." "I gave the council my obedience." His voice was cold enough to silence the entire courtyard. "This journey." He fastened his sword onto his back. "I make as a man." Fenrir appeared beside him, already prepared. The great black wolf's golden eyes burned with urgency. For the first time in years, King and wolf shared the same fear. They might already be too late. Far beneath the mountains, the ancient sanctuary glowed beneath rivers of silver crystal. Lyra stood at the center of the sacred chamber, surrounded by the moon priestesses. The reflection inside the crystal pool had disappeared, yet the warmth remained. Not around her, inside her. She looked down at her trembling hands. Silver markings slowly spread across her skin before fading once more beneath the surface. "What is happening to me?" The eldest priestess smiled gently. "The part of you that was hidden is finally awakening." "I've always been an Omega."
No.
The old woman shook her head. "You were raised believing you were one." She stepped toward an ancient mural carved into the temple wall. It depicted a great black wolf standing beside a radiant white she-wolf beneath a full moon. Between them stood two small wolf pups. The Moon Queen is neither Alpha nor Omega. She is balance. The one capable of calming rage without surrendering strength. The one whose heart heals what war destroys. Lyra stared silently at the ancient carving. "It can't be me." "It already is." The priestess touched the mural. For a moment, the stone came alive. Visions flooded Lyra's mind. Ancient kingdoms. Wolf clans kneeling beneath moonlight. A black wolf standing beside a silver queen. Then, a newborn child. Two tiny infants. The same twins she had rescued. "They're part of it." The priestess nodded. "Their bloodline protects the north. And yours protects them." Lyra's heart pounded. Then another vision struck. Ragnar, alone upon the fortress wall, holding the royal cloak she had returned, whispering only two words into the snow. "Forgive me." A single tear escaped down her cheek. She finally understood. He had not stopped loving his kingdom. He had simply forgotten how to trust his own heart. Meanwhile, Astrid Blackthorn stood inside the temple of the First Wolves. Unlike the Moon Sanctuary, this place had been consumed by darkness. Black roots twisted through broken stone. Ancient fires burned crimson instead of silver. At the center rested the twin heirs, sleeping, bound within a circle carved from blood. Astrid watched them calmly. "You should have accepted exile quietly, Lyra." Her voice echoed through the empty temple. "But kings are so predictable." Behind her stood dozens of mercenaries and corrupted nobles, all loyal through fear. One captain approached. "The Alpha King has crossed the mountains." Astrid smiled. "Good." She rested one hand upon an ancient black altar. "Bring him here. Let him watch the end of his bloodline." The journey through the mountains became a race against destiny. Ragnar rode without rest. Snow battered his face. Ice clung to his armor. Still he refused to slow. Fenrir suddenly howled. The mountain answered. Another howl echoed back. Not black.
White.
Silver wolves emerged from the forest. Dozens. Then hundreds. They surrounded Ragnar's warriors. Swords were drawn instantly. "No." Ragnar raised one hand. "They aren't attacking." The silver wolves simply turned toward the eastern cliffs. Waiting. Guiding. One enormous, white she-wolf stepped forward. Her glowing eyes met Ragnar's. Then she began walking. Fenrir followed without hesitation. Ragnar understood. Follow them. The wolves led the royal army through hidden mountain paths forgotten by every map, toward the temple of the first wolves.
Toward destiny.
Inside the dark temple, Astrid lifted the ceremonial blade. The twins remained asleep beneath the influence of ancient magic. One strike. That was all it would take. The heavy stone doors exploded inward. The impact echoed like thunder. Ragnar entered first, his sword already drawn. Fenrir lunged toward the mercenaries. The battle erupted instantly. Steel clashed against steel. Torches shattered. The temple shook beneath years of buried hatred. Ragnar fought like the man the legends remembered. Not for conquest. Not for glory. For his children. Every strike carried desperation. Every step carried guilt. Astrid laughed. So noble. She pressed the blade closer to one infant's chest. Drop your sword. Ragnar froze. The world narrowed to the tiny heartbeat of his son. For the second time in his life, he stood powerless before someone he loved. Slowly, he released his sword. It crashed against the stone floor. His warriors shouted in disbelief. My king. Astrid smiled triumphantly. The monster finally learned fear. Then, silver light flooded the temple. Every torch extinguished at once. The darkness retreated before a radiance brighter than dawn. Lyra entered. She no longer looked like the frightened Omega who had wandered into a blizzard. Silver markings shimmered across her skin. Her eyes reflected moonlight. Behind her walked the great white wolves of the ancient clans. The entire temple became silent. Even Astrid stepped backward. No, she whispered. It isn't possible. The moon priestesses entered behind Lyra. Then something extraordinary happened. Fenrir lowered himself before Lyra. Not in obedience. In recognition. One by one, every wolf inside the temple followed. The ancient prophecy had returned. Lyra looked only at Ragnar. He remained kneeling where he had dropped his sword. Their eyes met across the battlefield. I'm sorry. His voice broke. I chose fear instead of faith. I chose my crown instead of the woman who saved everything I loved. I was wrong. There was no king in his words. Only a broken man. Lyra walked toward him. Slowly.
Calmly.
Astrid screamed and lunged with the ceremonial blade. You'll lose everything. Before the blade could fall, silver light burst from Lyra. The entire temple trembled. The dark altar cracked apart. Astrid was thrown backward, her weapon shattering against the stone floor. The blood ritual collapsed. The twins awakened unharmed. The darkness that had poisoned the ancient temple dissolved like smoke beneath the morning sun. Silence followed. Ragnar looked at Lyra with tears he no longer tried to hide. He rose slowly, then did something no ruler in northern history had ever done. Before his warriors, before the nobles, before every ancient wolf, the Alpha King knelt. Not in defeat, in humility. I cannot erase the pain I caused. He placed his hand over his heart. But if you can forgive me, I ask you to choose me. Not because destiny commands it, but because your heart does. Lyra stood quietly. The silence stretched through the temple. Then she remembered the frightened father searching through the blizzard. The king who had wrapped his cloak around a stranger. The broken man who had whispered into the snow. Forgive me. She extended her hand. Ragnar looked up. I don't choose the king. A faint smile touched her lips. I choose the man who found his way back. He took her hand. The moment their fingers touched, a brilliant silver bond of light surrounded them. The sacred mating bond awakened beneath the blessing of the moon. Outside, dawn finally broke over the northern kingdom. Winter's grip began to loosen. Snow melted into crystal streams. Flowers pushed through frozen earth. Across the mountains, wolves raised a single unified howl that rolled from valley to valley, like a promise fulfilled. The Alpha twins laughed as Lyra gathered them into her arms. For the first time since their birth, they had both a father and a mother. The rejected Omega, who had once wandered alone through a blizzard, became the Moon Queen of the North. Not because she was destined to rule, but because she had chosen compassion when the world offered her only rejection. And beside her stood not the monster history feared, but the redeemed Alpha King who had learned that true strength was never measured by the kingdoms he conquered, only by the heart he finally had the courage to protect.
The end.